He said it like a joke, but it felt like a slap. Yeah, she sort of begged to stay here, my son laughed, and his friends laughed with him. I stood in the kitchen doorway, just out of sight, holding the tray with lemonade. They hadn't seen me yet. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe that gave me a few seconds to breathe before I stepped out and pretended not to have heard. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling fan turn slowly, shadows slicing the plaster above me. It was too hot. Or maybe I was too angry. At 73, you stop expecting praise for the things you do. But the sting of mockery, especially from your own child, never dulls. I bought him that house. Not helped, not contributed. Bought. Clean deed, clean conscience. It was my gift for his graduation from architecture school. 4 years of effort, 2 part-time jobs, and no help from his father. I'd saved for this moment. He didn't ask for a house. I offered. He looked stunned when I handed him the envelope at his small graduation dinner. My hand trembled more than his. I remember how he looked at me. Like a boy again. Not the tall man with expensive shoes and rehearsed opinions. Mom, are you serious? He'd asked. I was. I'd been saving since he was 15. It was a modest 2-bedroom in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but solid. I'd paid for the inspection, the permits, the roof repairs. I even stocked the kitchen before he moved in. Make it your own, I told him, handing over the keys. But don't forget, every home starts with respect. He hugged me that day, tight, real. Now I stood in the kitchen of that very house, overhearing him speak about me like I was some clingy old woman with nowhere else to go. She begged to stay here. What a thing to say. I'd asked to visit for a week. Just a week. My own apartment was under fumigation for mold. I offered to pay for a hotel, but he insisted I stay with him. Or so I thought. I carried the lemonade out to the back deck, where his friends, young, polished, carefree, lounged with beers and Bluetooth speakers humming some rhythm I didn't recognize. Thanks, Mom, he said casually, lifting the tray off my hands like I was staff. No one looked me in the eye. I sat in the shade, listening to them talk about architecture, travel, things I no longer understood. The conversation skipped past me like stones on water. At one point, his friend, tall, tan, wearing a watch worth more than my pension, joked, "You've got a pretty sweet setup here, man. Free house and home-cooked meals?" My son grinned. Well, gotta keep the investors happy. They laughed again. I smiled too. The kind of smile you learn after years of swallowing things you'll never digest. Later that evening, after they left, he found me in the guest room folding my clothes. Thanks for today, he said. I think they liked the lemonade. I nodded. They're nice boys. He leaned against the doorframe, phone in hand. Yeah, they've got connections. You never know who can help you out in this field. I waited. I hope you weren't offended earlier, he said, not meeting my eyes. You know how guys joke. I folded another shirt. What exactly did you mean when you said I begged to stay here? He laughed lightly. Mom, come on. It's just talk. Nobody takes that stuff seriously. I do. He frowned. Are you upset? I'm disappointed, I said plainly. But I suppose that's old-fashioned. He shifted his weight, checked a notification. Don't make this a big thing, okay? It's just how we talk. It's no reflection on you. But it was. It always is. That night, I lay in bed and thought about the years. The lunches skipped so he could have piano lessons. The nights working double shifts so I wouldn't have to say no when he asked for something. The hours spent praying he'd feel proud of me. not burdened by me. I thought about the house, about the trust I'd created, the legal structure he never read carefully, about the clause tucked neatly on page 6, small font, plain language. The settlor retains right to revoke residence privileges in the event of personal disrespect or degradation. He never bothered to read that far, or maybe he thought I never would. I closed my eyes. The fan spun on. The silence was heavy, but for once it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like decision. The next morning, I sat on the back porch with my coffee, watching the sun climb over the fence. The neighborhood was waking up. Dogs barked, sprinklers ticked. A jogger passed in neon shoes. My son hadn't woken yet. His shoes were still neatly lined by the front door, the ones I'd bought him for his first job interview. I watched the light fall across the lawn I helped him seed last fall. We'd laughed that day, arguing about fertilizer brands, both covered in mud by the end. I thought those moments mattered. I thought they lingered in him, like they did in me. But people forget differently. He didn't mention the comment from the night before when he came into the kitchen. Just breezed in, towel slung around his neck, phone already lit up in his hand. "Morning, Mom," he said, opening the fridge. "Did we run out of oat milk?" "We." I stood at the sink, rinsing my cup. "I think there's some regular milk behind the apples." He frowned, peered in, closed the fridge. "That stuff upsets my stomach." "I'll pick some up later," I offered. He grunted a half thank you and drifted back to his phone. That was the rhythm now. Me, a quiet figure in the corners of his life. Cooking, cleaning, remembering. Him, moving forward like I was a background hum. He never asked how I slept, how my hip was doing, how long I planned to stay. I'd said a week when I arrived. That was 5 days ago. 2 more to go. I hadn't realized until now how much I was counting. I spent the afternoon rearranging my suitcase. It was a silly habit I'd picked up from the years of traveling back and forth to my mother's house when she was sick. Repacking, as if order in luggage could make up for the disorder in everything else. I folded my clothes tightly, zipped compartments, counted what I'd come with. No mess. No trace. That night, he had another friend over. A woman this time. Tall, poised, with perfect nails and a voice that carried. I didn't catch her name. They stayed in the living room, laughing over old college stories. I stayed in the kitchen, out of sight. I didn't want to hear, but I always heard. "So, your mom's still here?" the woman asked mid-laugh. "Yeah," he said, dragging the word. "She's, between places right now." I put down the dish I was washing. "Between places?" she repeated. He chuckled. "Yeah, her place had some issue. Mold or something? She's crashing here for a bit." Crashing. Like I was a party guest who overstayed. Like I hadn't been invited. "You're sweet to let her stay," she said. "A lot of guys wouldn't." He paused. Then, quieter. "Yeah, well, guilt does funny things." That one landed hard. I turned off the tap, dried my hands. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped it out with a ladle. I tiptoed back to the guest room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the little framed print on the wall. Some watercolor cityscape he'd bought at a thrift store. Guilt? Is that what he thought all this was? That I bought him a home because I felt bad? That my presence was some slow-motion emotional blackmail? I opened my purse and took out the folder I always traveled with, the one he'd never asked about. Inside were copies of everything: the deed, the trust documentation, the letter from my lawyer. I'd drafted it all carefully. I'd gifted him the house, yes, but with boundaries. Not because I doubted him, but because the world was uncertain. Clause 4.3. Retained rights of use and revocation. I ran my finger along the line. It felt almost like Braille now, like something meant to be read through touch more than sight. I hadn't expected to ever use it. I thought it was a formality, a protective measure. But here I was, reading it again, not as a mother safeguarding a future, but as a woman reclaiming a past. That night, I didn't set the table for dinner. He noticed. "Are we not eating?" he asked, standing in the hallway. "I already had something," I replied. He looked confused. "Alone?" "Yes." He lingered, like he wanted to say something. Then his phone buzzed, and he drifted away. I stared at the table. It felt too big for one, too small for two people who barely spoke. I thought about dignity, how it's never stolen all at once, how it goes missing piece by piece, shrinking to fit the silences, the sighs, the swallowed protests. I wasn't angry, not like the hot, sharp anger of youth. This was different. This was the heavy, slow burn of clarity. I saw things now, clearly. 2 days left, and then we'd both learn what ownership really means. The house smelled like basil and roasted tomatoes the next evening. I'd made his favorite, pasta al forno, just like he used to ask for on his birthdays. I didn't say it was a goodbye gesture, didn't announce that it was the last meal I'd cook here. But I folded the napkins with care and laid out the good plates he never used. He came home late, muttered something about traffic and a work call that went long. I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he kicked off his shoes and tossed his jacket over the banister. "You cooked," he said, surprised. "Smells good." I thought it would be nice to sit down, just us. He hesitated. "I'm starving." We sat across from each other like strangers meeting again after a long time. He scrolled through his phone while eating, stopping only to praise the food briefly, mouth half full. "This is really good," he said. "You should have opened that catering thing like you talked about." "I didn't want to work nights while you were young," I said simply. He didn't look up. "Yeah, well, could have been fun." I watched him eat. My son, 30 years old, handsome, clever, ambitious. He wore his father's jawline and his uncle's wit. But he'd inherited my stubbornness. That much I couldn't deny. "Do you remember the first time we looked at houses?" I asked after a while. He blinked. "Houses?" "I mean when we started searching. For this place." "Oh, yeah. Vaguely." "You wanted a loft downtown? With the brick walls and no parking?" He laughed. "Right. You said it looked like a converted stable." It probably was. He chuckled, and for a moment, there it was. That softness, that boyish ease. I wanted to hold on to it, but it slipped away as he reached for his phone again. "Can I ask you something?" I said quietly. "Sure," he said without looking up. "Why did you tell your friends I begged to stay here?" His fingers froze on the screen. I waited. I wasn't going to fill the silence for him. "I didn't mean it like that," he finally said. "But you said it." He put the phone down, sat back. "Look, Mom, you're making this into something it's not. We were just talking. People say things." I nodded. "And when you said I was between places?" He sighed. "I was trying not to make it awkward. You know how people are." "No," I said. "Explain it to me." He shook his head. "Why are we going over this?" "Because it matters." "To me?" He stood abruptly. "I'm not doing this, okay? You're here, you needed help, I said yes. What more do you want?" Respect. That word stopped him. It just hung there between us. "I'm your mother," I said, still calm, "and I know when I'm being tolerated." He looked away. "You're overreacting." "You keep saying that," I said. "Every time I tell you something hurts, you say I'm imagining it." "But I heard you." He didn't answer, just stared out the window like something outside was more urgent than this. I gathered our plates and walked them to the sink. He stayed standing. After a moment, he said, "You don't have to do the dishes. It's fine." "I know." That night, I packed everything. Every item I'd brought with me, neatly folded, zipped tight. No trace. I cleaned the bathroom, wiped down the kitchen counters. I left the sheets folded on the edge of the bed and placed my spare house key on the kitchen table under a coaster. I wrote a note. Not because I had to, but because I wanted no room for confusion later. "I'm leaving a day early. Thank you for the hospitality. Take care of yourself. Mom." I slipped out just after dawn, carrying my suitcase down the porch steps. The cab driver was waiting. As he loaded my bag into the trunk, I looked back once. The house stood quiet, sunlight just beginning to stretch across the lawn. He didn't know I was gone yet. Maybe he wouldn't notice until noon. Maybe later. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. Instead, I opened my wallet, pulled out the small business card I always carried. My lawyer's. I'd already called him 2 days ago. Told him to prepare the documents. That morning, I wasn't Irene the mother, the one who made school lunches and filled college savings accounts. I was just Irene, and I had a call to make. The lawyer's office was quiet when I arrived. Just the sound of the receptionist typing and a soft radio playing something classical. I waited on a leather chair that smelled like old paper and lemon oil. The same chair I'd sat in a year ago when I first signed the transfer. That day, I was all pride. Pride and hope. I wore my good shoes and brought cookies for the staff. "A graduation gift," I'd said, almost embarrassed by how emotional I felt. The lawyer, Mr. Henley, had smiled, asking gently if I was sure I wanted to place the house entirely in my son's name. "Yes," I'd said. "He deserves a clean start." "But," I'd added, "I'd like to retain some technical safeguards. Nothing intrusive. Just quiet protections." And so we drafted them: the trust agreement, the occupancy clause, the revocation mechanism. Legal instruments dressed in polite language. My son never asked about them. I'd handed him a folder marked "For Your Records," and he'd placed it on the kitchen counter, unopened. Now I was back. Not with cookies this time, but with a tightness in my chest and a folded sheet of notes in my purse. Mr. Henley welcomed me into his office with the same calm demeanor. "Mrs. Mallory," he said, gesturing to the chair. "It's good to see you again, though I suspect this isn't a social call." "It isn't," I replied, sitting down. He folded his hands. "How can I help?" "I want to execute the retention clause," I said. "Section 4.3. Effective immediately." He didn't flinch, just nodded and opened a drawer. "May I ask what's happened?" "No abuse," I said quickly. "Nothing that would require court intervention. But he's been careless. With my name. With my dignity. I don't want to live in that house, Mr. Henley. But I don't want my gift to stand without consequence either." He reviewed the papers, nodded again. "The clause allows for temporary revocation of access to the property, pending review. Technically, the home is in his name, but the deed passes through the trust. You retain full power to restrict the use of the asset." "I'd like to enforce it," I said. "We'll need to notify him formally," he said. "Would you prefer certified mail or personal delivery?" "Certified, but delay the sending for 24 hours." Henley raised an eyebrow. Of course. May I ask why? Because I want him to hear it from me first. One last courtesy. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. You've always been a measured woman, Mrs. Mallory. Not many people plan for both generosity and accountability. I was a single mother, I said. I learned the hard way that planning ahead isn't pessimism. It's love with foresight. He smiled, and we signed the preliminary documents. I left his office with a copy in my purse and a knot in my stomach. Outside, the sky had darkened. Rain threatened. I walked 2 blocks to a cafe and ordered tea, hands still shaking slightly. He'd call, eventually. Once he found the note. Once he realized I was gone. But for now, I had silence. And that silence was sacred. That evening, I checked into a small motel outside town. Nothing fancy, just a clean room with a stiff bed and a lamp that buzzed when turned too high. I unpacked 1 shirt, 1 pair of shoes, and the legal folder. I placed the folder on the nightstand. I turned my phone off. Not to avoid him, but to hold the line. Sometimes people need to feel absence like a bruise before they recognize presence for the gift it is. Tomorrow, I would call him. 1 final conversation, 1 honest talk, without apron strings or guilt. And then the house would close, not physically, but spiritually. And he'd learn what ownership really meant. I turned my phone on at 10 a.m. sharp. It took less than 30 seconds for the first message to come through. Mom, where are you? Then, you left? Why? Then a voice message, 42 seconds long. I didn't open it. Instead, I stared out the motel window, watching the clouds drift over the parking lot. A young couple with a baby were loading bags into their car. The baby cried once, then stopped, soothed by something only mothers seem to know how to do. At 10:04, he called. I let it ring. He called again at 10:07, then again at 10:12. I picked up on the 4th try. Mom? Yes. Oh, thank God, he exhaled. Are you okay? What happened? I'm fine. There was a pause. I came home last night, and you were gone. Just a note. Why didn't you tell me you were leaving early? I didn't think it would matter. Of course it matters, he said, the defensiveness already blooming in his voice. You just left without saying goodbye. That's not like you. No, I agreed. It's not. Another pause. Longer this time. Look, he said, gentler. If this is about that thing with my friends, I told you it was just a joke. Maybe a bad one, but it didn't mean anything. It meant something to me. But you didn't even talk to me about it properly. I'm talking now. Okay, he said slowly, then talk. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone cool against my cheek. My voice was calm, steady. I'd rehearsed this. I gave you that house because I believed in you. I wanted you to start your life with something I never had. Security. I didn't want strings attached. I didn't expect anything in return. But respect, that should have been assumed. He didn't speak. I didn't beg to stay in that house. I never needed charity. You offered, and I accepted. But you didn't tell your friends the truth. You told them a story that made you look good, and me small. Mom, he said quietly, I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. The line was quiet again. I made pasta for you, I said. I cleaned the bathroom. I stocked your fridge. I folded your laundry when you forgot. I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because that's what mothers do. But I see now that you saw me as a guest overstaying her welcome, or worse, an inconvenience. His voice cracked then, just slightly. That's not fair. No, I said. It's not. I just didn't know how to explain things to them, he said. They're not like us. I closed my eyes. And who are we, exactly? He didn't answer. You have until noon tomorrow, I said. Mr. Henley will be sending you formal notice. The house will be placed under limited restriction for a period of 30 days. No guests, no events. Use of the property will be reviewed. It's all outlined in the trust agreement. What? He snapped. You're revoking access to my house? No, I'm enforcing the terms of the gift. He laughed bitterly. This is insane. You're punishing me? No, I said. I'm showing you what ownership means. It isn't entitlement. It's responsibility. And it starts with how you treat the people who helped you get there. You can't just take it back. I'm not. You're still the legal owner. I'm just reminding you that ownership isn't a trophy. It's a mirror. If you can't live with your reflection, that's not the mirror's fault. He went quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder. You've changed. No, I said gently. I just stopped hiding how much this hurts. He ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat for a while in that motel room, feeling nothing and everything at once. The walls were thin. I could hear a vacuum running down the hall, a toddler yelling 2 doors down. Then I took a deep breath, and I ordered lunch. For one. The food arrived in a plain brown bag. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, a bottle of water. Nothing fancy, just something warm. I ate slowly, watching the tiny TV in the corner play a cooking show on low volume. The host was laughing at something I couldn't hear. For a moment, I imagined she was laughing with me, the way old friends do when you finally let the truth fall out of your mouth. By 2 o'clock, I'd turned my phone off again. Not to block him, but to pause the noise. I needed stillness. Needed to listen to myself for once. At 4, the motel phone rang. I hesitated before picking up. Irene Mallory? The woman asked. This is June Hathaway. I'm sorry to call you here, but I didn't know where else to reach you. It took me a second to place the voice. Then I remembered. June was the mother of my son's ex-girlfriend. They'd dated for nearly 3 years. I always liked her. Quiet, observant. Her daughter had called me Miss Irene long after they'd broken up. Yes, I said. I'm here. I hope I'm not overstepping, she said. But I heard you left your son's house. He called looking for advice and, well, I've just been thinking about you. I didn't answer right away. I know it's not my place, she continued, but I wanted to tell you something. Go ahead. You didn't do anything wrong. The words came softly, but they landed like a hand on the shoulder. I was there, you know, she said. At that dinner last year when he gave that speech. The one where he thanked everyone, his mentors, his friends, even his barista, but not you. I watched your face, and I've never forgotten it. I closed my eyes. I thought you were being too generous with that house, she said. But I also understood. I've been a mother. I've done foolish things in the name of love. You just loved harder than most. I took a breath. Thank you, June. I don't know what's going to happen, she said, but I wanted you to hear from someone else that you're not crazy or dramatic. You're just finally drawing a line. And that's brave. After we hung up, I sat with that word. Brave. It wasn't a word I'd used about myself in years. Not since I'd held my husband's hand in hospice, whispering promises I didn't know how to keep. Not since I'd sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., balancing bills and wondering how I'd get my son through school on a waitress's salary. But maybe it fit now. Not because I was fearless, but because I was finally facing the fear. That evening, I went for a walk. Just around the parking lot, down the side street, past the tiny gas station with dusty windows. I didn't go far. My knees wouldn't allow it. But I needed to feel air on my skin. Needed to see something other than motel wallpaper. The wind had a bite to it. Not cruel, but honest. A little girl on a tricycle zoomed past me, her braids flying like streamers. Her mother trailed behind, exhausted but smiling. It reminded me of when my son was 5 and begged for a blue bike for Christmas. We couldn't afford it, not really. But I worked double shifts and found one on sale, wrapped it in gold paper. He screamed when he saw it, rode it up and down the hallway for hours. He was kind once. He loved me once. The ache wasn't that it had ended. It was that he'd decided it was inconvenient to remember. Back in the room, I made tea using the little coffee pot. It tasted faintly of plastic and old water, but it was hot. I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket from my suitcase, and watched the evening settle. I didn't know what the next week would bring. I didn't know if he'd call again, or if the silence would stretch until it broke. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was living in a space that belonged to me. Not a gift, not a favor, just mine. I turned the light off and let the dark come in. It didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like rest. He called again the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. By now, I'd learned to tell the tone of a message from the silence before it started. This one began with a heavy sigh. Mom, look, I get it. You're mad. I screwed up. But can we please talk like adults? Then came the pivot. Always the pivot. I know I've been insensitive, but you leaving like that? Calling a lawyer? That's not just overreacting, it's extreme. You're proving everyone's point. Everyone's. I stared at the phone as if it had bitten me. He didn't mean to let that slip, I'm sure. But it was there now, ugly and clear. He'd talked about me, to others, framed me not as hurt, but as hysterical, as the difficult woman who wouldn't let her son grow up without drama. I deleted the message. By noon, he tried a different approach. Text this time. I'd like you to come to the networking event on Saturday. I'll be speaking. Could be a good moment to show unity. Unity. I laughed, out loud, in the empty motel room, as if I were a campaign mascot, as if the worst thing I'd done was break the illusion. Still, something in me wavered. I was curious, not hopeful, but curious. So I replied. Where and when? He sent the address, a glassy downtown event center, the kind with valet parking and overpriced coffee. Saturday at 6. I didn't confirm, but I kept the message. The next day, I went to a thrift store and bought a dark green dress, simple, well-cut, modest. I had shoes in my suitcase. I brought a comb and some mascara from the corner store. Nothing fancy. Just enough to look like myself. If myself had a backbone, she'd finally stopped hiding. On Saturday evening, I stood outside the venue for a long time, watching guests trickle in. Women in heels too high for standing, men with name tags and tired smiles. Everyone looked like they'd practiced their charm in the mirror. I walked in alone. No one greeted me. I wasn't on any list. I'd forgotten that my name wasn't something he liked to say out loud. Eventually, I found him by the coffee stand, talking to a woman with a clipboard. He wore a navy blazer and looked polished, prepared, like he'd finally stepped into the life he thought he deserved. When he saw me, his face froze. Mom, he said, you came. I did. He glanced at the woman beside him, then back at me. Uh, great. That's, that's great. The woman smiled politely and excused herself. He turned to me, lowering his voice. I meant for you to sit in the back, he said. Just so you know, I've got colleagues here. Important people. And? And I just need everything to run smoothly tonight. No surprises. I looked at him. Really looked at him. You think I came here to make a scene? He hesitated. I came because you asked, I said. And I wanted to see for myself. See what? What you've become. He didn't answer, just checked his watch. I need to prep. There's a seat for you in the last row. Then he was gone. I sat where he asked, in the back. The room filled with applause and laughter and that slick, corporate energy that makes people feel important. He spoke well, confidently, told stories about growing up with little, about learning the value of hard work, about never taking handouts. I sat there, hands folded, as he built his image brick by brick. No mention of me. No nod to the woman who scrubbed dishes and saved pennies and bought him a house he now pretended had come from hard work and luck. When the applause ended, he didn't look for me. I walked out before the mingling began. Outside, the air was cool. A breeze picked up, lifting my hair gently. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the sadness had been replaced by something sharper. Certainty. I pulled out my phone and typed a short message. Consider this your notice. The 30-day restriction begins Monday. All details will come through legal channels. Then I turned the phone off. I walked 3 blocks before finding a bench, sat down, and breathed. Not because it was over, but because it had finally begun. I took the bus back to the motel. It was nearly empty. Just me, a man in a stained ball cap, and a teenage girl nodding off with headphones in. The city moved past the window in flickers. Diners, dry cleaners, places I didn't recognize anymore. Places I used to pass with a stroller, then a lunch bag, then alone. I got off 2 stops, early, needing the walk. Each step home was slow but sure. My legs didn't move like they used to. But my mind? It had never been clearer. Back in the room, I kicked off my shoes and changed into my house clothes. Loose slacks, soft sweater. I laid the green dress carefully over the chair. I didn't hate it. I just didn't need it anymore. It had done its job. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window with the legal folder again. I didn't reread the documents this time. I just held the folder, the weight of it, the quiet strength of having planned ahead, not out of distrust, but out of knowing how life works. My son was born when I was 29. I hadn't planned to be a mother alone, but when his father left, he didn't take the boy. Just the keys to our apartment and most of the bank account. I remember standing in front of the fridge that first week with a bottle of ketchup, 2 eggs, and a half loaf of bread. I made it work. I always made it work. I worked as a waitress at first, then a hotel front desk, then cleaning offices at night. I never blamed my son. He was a baby. He didn't ask for any of it. And he never knew how close we came to sleeping in the car. I never let him feel it. He got his first science kit when he was 7. I bought it with tip money and a coupon. He built a cardboard bridge and called it indestructible. I told him one day he'd build real ones, and he believed me. I packed his lunches with handwritten notes. I taught him to cook scrambled eggs. I held him when he cried because a teacher called him distracted. I cried in secret when his first girlfriend broke his heart and he said, "She said I was too soft, like a boy with a mom problem." That was the first time I heard the shame. It wasn't loud, just a whisper, but it planted something. In college, he stopped calling every week, then every month, then only when he needed help with tuition, with housing, with books. I gave every time, not because I was naive, but because I couldn't bear the thought of him thinking I'd ever turn away. When he graduated, I was there, front row, clapping so hard my hands stung. He didn't introduce me to his friends that day, said they were just people from the program. I stood beside him for a picture. He didn't post it. Bad lighting, he said. I didn't press. Instead, I went home and started planning the house. Because I thought maybe security would be the bridge back. Maybe love made visible could make love remembered. But now I know, gifts don't fix distance. Respect does. And when that's gone, nothing, no title, no deed, no speech in a rented blazer can make up the difference. I took a sip of tea. It had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. Outside, the wind had picked up. I watched a paper cup roll across the parking lot, tumble into a puddle, and stay there. Not everything has to be picked up. Some things are better left where they land. Tomorrow, the restriction notice would be delivered. Official. I didn't know how he'd react. I didn't care. He could scream. He could sulk. He could spin his version of the truth to anyone willing to listen. But I had mine. And mine was no longer negotiable. The lawyer's office was brighter than I remembered. Mr. Henley welcomed me with a gentle nod and a manila folder already waiting on his desk. His sleeves were rolled neatly at the cuff, like he'd anticipated we'd be getting into the details. I received confirmation that the certified notice was delivered, he said as I sat down. Signed for at 8:46 this morning. I nodded. Then he knows. He does, Henley confirmed. Have you had any further contact? Not yet. I expect I will. He opened the folder. As per our agreement, the property is now under a 30-day restriction. No third-party hosting, no leasing, no public events, and technically, no overnight guests. He looked up. You're still listed as a contingent trustee with the authority to freeze full access should behavior breach the spirit of the agreement. That clause is rare. I included it on purpose, I said. I knew he wouldn't read that far. Henley nodded. It's airtight. The trust owns the asset. He has beneficiary rights, not autonomous control. And if you chose to, you could file for permanent suspension. I let that hang in the air. It wasn't my plan, but it was good to know it was an option. I don't want to ruin him, I said. Just remind him. Sometimes the reminder is the only mercy left. He slid a form toward me. This outlines the administrative triggers. We'll monitor compliance. If anything violates the conditions, you'll be notified immediately. Otherwise, the restriction expires in 30 days unless you extend it. I signed. My hand didn't tremble. He paused, then leaned forward slightly. I've been doing this a long time, Mrs. Mallory, and I've seen every version of this story. Parents pushed aside, dismissed, taken for granted. But rarely do they walk in here prepared. I wasn't always. No, but you are now. I didn't smile. I wasn't here for comfort. I stood, gathering my purse. What happens if he challenges the terms? He can hire a lawyer, but unless he wants to go to court and try to dissolve the trust, he won't get far. And even if he tries, it will take time. Time during which the terms remain in effect. Good. Outside, the wind had shifted. A dry, dusty breeze swept through the parking lot. I stood by my car for a moment, letting it press against my coat, eyes closed. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my voice for the sake of peace. bit my tongue during holidays, played the quiet guest at his dinners, laughed at jokes that used me as the punchline. No more. I didn't care if he threw a tantrum or if he played the victim. Let him try. The world is kind to confident sons, but it rarely listens to the women who made them. That's fine. I wasn't speaking for the world anymore. I drove to a nearby diner and ordered lunch, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. Ate slowly, reading through the documents again, tracing the signatures with my fingertip. Each page was a line drawn, not in anger, but in self-respect. He'd learn, not because I'd force him, but because I'd stopped protecting him from the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the most expensive lesson a man can learn, especially when it arrives in legal language he never cared to read. I returned to the house on a Tuesday morning. The sky was gray, not quite raining, just heavy with the kind of silence that settles before a storm. I hadn't told him I was coming. I didn't need to. The papers had been served. The boundary was drawn. Now it was time to finish what I'd left undone. I let myself in with the second key, the one he didn't remember I kept. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels staged, like someone tidied in a hurry. There were faint signs of recent living, an open bottle of wine on the counter, shoes kicked off near the sofa, a laptop left charging. But the air felt stiff. I walked through the rooms slowly. I didn't come to argue. I didn't come to be seen. I came to gather the last pieces of myself and leave without fanfare. In the guest room, the linens had been stripped. The bed stood bare, corners still sharp from my hands the day I made it. The window was cracked open. A draft lifted the curtain, then let it fall again. I opened the closet. My sweater was still there. The one he'd told me looked a little too homey for a dinner with his colleagues. I took it off the hanger, folded it tightly, and placed it in my bag. In the hallway, I retrieved my umbrella, the one with the chipped wooden handle, and the canvas tote I'd left by the coat rack. Nothing much remained. I hadn't brought much to begin with. I knew better than to settle in fully. Still, there was one last thing. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer by the sink. The one where I used to keep recipes clipped from old magazines, little notes for groceries, pens that always ran out of ink. I reached toward the back and pulled out a small envelope. Inside, it was the letter I'd written the day I signed over the house. I'd left it there, tucked away, never delivered. Just a page, folded neatly, sealed and stamped with his name on the front. I read it once more, quietly. You don't owe me anything, but you do owe yourself the truth. And one day, when your ambition fades and your heart aches louder than your pride, I hope you remember this. Home is never about walls. It's about who kept you warm when the world turned cold. I didn't leave it on the counter. I put it back in my purse. He'd get it eventually, just not today. At the front door, I paused, hand on the knob. I looked back, not out of sentiment, but to make sure I'd taken everything that was mine, not just objects, but the air I filled, the kindness I left, the silence I endured. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. No keys left behind, no note, no performance. The street was still and clean. Cars parked neatly. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. I walked to the curb and waited for the ride I'd called. When the driver pulled up, he smiled and offered to help with my bag. "I've got it," I said. The engine hummed gently as we drove away. I didn't look back. Let him walk into that house tonight and notice what's missing. Let him search the drawers and find nothing. Let him feel the vacancy that kindness used to occupy. I didn't need to slam doors to be heard. I'd already said everything I needed to say, just not in the language he was used to. This was mine, my ending, my exit. And I took it with grace. The calls started that night. The first came just after 8 p.m. I saw his name light up on the screen while I sat at the small motel desk, pen in hand, halfway through a crossword I had no intention of finishing. I let it ring. The second came 10 minutes later. Then a message. "Mom, you've made your point? Can we talk now?" There was no apology, just negotiation. By the time I brushed my teeth and climbed into bed, 5 more missed calls blinked at me. I turned the phone face down and let sleep claim me. In the morning, the voicemail count had doubled. Some short, clipped, others long, wandering, laced with that manufactured calm he used when he wanted something. "Look, I just think this got out of hand. Okay, yes, I said some things, but so have you. Can we not make this into a war? I mean, it's still my house." That one made me laugh. Quietly, bitterly. Still my house. He hadn't learned a thing. By noon, I turned the phone off completely. I walked down to the local post office and mailed the letter I'd kept. The one he was never supposed to read, but now, maybe, needed to. Not as a mother, not as a warning, but as the last honest thing I'd say without a lawyer copied on the exchange. The woman at the counter weighed the envelope gently, printed the label, and asked, "Need tracking?" "No," I said. "It'll find him." When I returned, the motel clerk handed me a slip of paper. "You had a visitor," he said. "Young man, brown jacket. Left this." The note was in my son's handwriting, sloppier than usual. "Please call me. I'll wait in the car for a bit." I didn't. I watched from the window as he sat in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was holding him together. He stayed for nearly an hour, then pulled away without looking back. He still didn't know how. That night, I made myself a small dinner, just soup and toast. No need to cook for 2 anymore. No need to portion or present or wait. I sat by the window with my tea and watched the cars pass, each one going somewhere, each one carrying people who hadn't imagined, once upon a time, that their child might someday speak to them like a burden. But here we were. At 73, I no longer believed in tidy reconciliations. People didn't change because they were told to. They changed when their comforts were disrupted, when the story they told about themselves cracked open and they were forced to face what lay beneath. He wasn't ready. Maybe one day he would be. But I couldn't spend my last good years waiting at a door he kept bolting shut behind him. The next morning, the motel phone rang again. "Mrs. Mallory?" the clerk said. "You have another visitor. Same young man." I stepped into the hallway in my robe and slippers, hair still damp from the shower. He was standing near the entrance, pacing, his coat too thin for the cold, his eyes catching mine the moment I turned the corner. "Mom?" he said, his voice soft. I didn't say anything. I need to talk to you." "I'm listening," I said, but I didn't move closer. "I messed up," he began. I know I made you feel small, and I didn't mean to. I thought that's how people talk. You know, like jokes. Everyone jokes." "You're not everyone," I said. "You're my son." I know, and I was wrong. I was careless." I stood there, arms crossed, heart steady. Carelessness and cruelty can look the same from where I stood. "I didn't mean to push you away." "You didn't need to mean it," I said. "You just needed to do it enough times." He looked down at his hands. I've been reading the trust documents, he said. I didn't know all that was in there. I didn't realize you still had that kind of control. I raised an eyebrow. That's what bothers you. He shook his head quickly. No, I mean, yes, but not in the way you think. It made me realize how much you did, quietly, without ever asking for anything. I didn't soften. Not yet. He took a slow breath. I don't want to lose you. I looked at him. My boy. My grown man. Standing there with regret, like a shirt one size too tight. You already did, I said gently. The question now is whether you can earn me back. He blinked. Can I? That's not something I decide today, I said. It's something you prove, with time, and without assuming there's still a place waiting for you just because you came back to look. He nodded, slowly. Okay. I'm going to stay elsewhere for a while, I added. I need space, and you need silence. He looked like he wanted to say more, but for once, he didn't. He just whispered, okay, again, and turned to go. And I let him. Not because I didn't love him, but because, maybe for the first time in his life, I loved myself just as much. The apartment was small, just 3 rooms stacked neatly above a flower shop on a quiet street where the buses came every half hour and the neighbors kept to themselves. The landlord was a retired postal worker who gave me a discount when I offered to water the plants in the stairwell. I liked that. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a bag of groceries. That was all I needed. No heavy boxes, no furniture trucks, no photos of people who looked like strangers in frames I once dusted every Saturday morning. Just me, a soft quilt, and a kettle that whistled like it meant it. The first night, I sat on the floor with a bowl of lentil soup and stared at the blank walls. I didn't feel lonely. I felt clean, like I'd been carrying too many rooms for too many years and had finally set them down. The windows faced west, so the light came late in the day, golden, slanted, kind. I didn't buy curtains right away. I liked watching the sky darken slowly, the way dusk folded over the city like a wool blanket. Each morning, I made coffee and opened the window, even when it was cold. The air reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still mine. I walked to the corner market every other day. Bought apples in 2s, tea in small boxes, bread that went stale if you didn't eat it fast enough. I didn't hoard anymore. I didn't plan for guests. I fed myself and no one else. I stopped checking my phone for his name, not out of spite, but because I was no longer waiting. There is a difference between silence that punishes and silence that protects. I chose the second, not to wound him, but to stitch myself. Sometimes I sat on the little balcony with a notepad, scribbling things that had no purpose except to exist. Grocery lists I'd already finished, letters I'd never send. One evening, I wrote his name down, looked at it, then slowly tore the paper into pieces and let them fall into the wastebasket. It wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. At 73, I didn't want revenge. I wanted rest, not sleep, not resignation, but the kind of rest that comes when you finally stop asking for permission to feel what you feel. I made friends with the florist downstairs. Her name was Ava, and she reminded me of myself at 40, brisk, kind, always wiping her hands on her apron. Sometimes she gave me the blooms that were too bruised to sell. I placed them in a chipped glass on the windowsill. They never lasted long, but they were beautiful while they did. Every so often, I'd get a text from a number I still hadn't blocked. Thinking of you today. Saw your favorite tea at the store. Miss you. I never replied, because thinking isn't doing, seeing isn't reaching. Missing isn't changing. He still didn't understand that love, once disrespected, doesn't return on demand. It has to be rebuilt from the ground up, brick by brick, word by word, silence by silence. And some silences are sacred. One afternoon, I took out the old photo album, the one I hadn't opened in years. I flipped through pictures of birthdays, beach trips, scraped knees, science fairs, graduations. I saw the version of him that still lived in my memory. Eyes bright, hand always in mine, asking, "Did I do good, Mom?" And I whispered, "You did." Because back then, he had. And I still loved that boy, fiercely. But I no longer owed the man he became what he hadn't earned. I closed the album, returned it to the shelf, and went back to my tea. Outside, the city carried on. Horns, footsteps, birds arguing in the eaves. Inside, peace. Not because everything had healed, but because I had. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. No return address. Just my name, written in his handwriting, still crooked, still heavy on the downstrokes like he was carving rather than writing. I turned it over in my hands twice before opening it. No ceremony, just a letter opener and a steady breath. The paper was thick, too nice for apologies. Maybe that was the point. He began with no greeting, just the words, "I don't expect you to answer." That was new. No mom, no "I've been thinking," no soft preface to blur the shape of what was coming. I reread everything, the documents, your letter, even the text messages. I get it now, or at least I'm beginning to. You weren't trying to punish me. You were showing me where the floor was. I stopped reading for a moment, just to feel the silence between the lines. Then I continued. I used to tell people I came from nothing. That's not true. I came from you. I came from late shifts and double helpings and winters where the heat barely reached the kitchen. I came from a woman who chose dignity over comfort, again and again. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that becoming successful meant erasing where I came from. I told stories that made me sound self-made because I thought that's what strength looked like. But it wasn't strength. It was cowardice in a nicer coat. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, not because I was crying, but because something inside me, something stiff, was finally starting to give. Not melt, not soften, just shift. I didn't realize how much I'd relied on your silence to make my version of things easier to carry. And I didn't know that by the time you stopped speaking, you weren't angry. You were done. I folded the letter once, then unfolded it again. My fingers needed something to do. I don't know what kind of relationship we have now. Maybe none. I've earned that. But if there's a door open, even a small one, I'll wait by it. Not with demands, not with expectations, just with my hand open if you ever decide to take it again. No signature, no love, always. Just space, a clean, white ending. I sat with that letter for a long time, the kind of long that doesn't feel like waiting, but witnessing. It wasn't an apology full of cushions and excuses. It was a reckoning. Late, yes, but real. Still, I didn't move. I didn't reach for the phone. Didn't draft a reply. Didn't let memory run ahead of me with the leash loose. Because something in me had changed. Not into something harder, but something wiser. I no longer mistook regret for restoration. He had taken a step. And I had the right to remain still. To sit in my quiet apartment with the chipped mug and the sound of the florist's broom brushing the sidewalk downstairs. To live one more evening without being needed. To finish my tea. To fold the letter, place it in the drawer, and let it sit. Unanswered, but not discarded. It was enough. Not everything, but enough for today. It was Sunday morning when I finally walked the long way to the park. The sun was low and soft, not warm exactly, but generous. I hadn't been there in months, not since before everything unraveled, before the house, the silence, the letter. The gravel path crunched underfoot the way it always had, and the trees, half turning gold, half clinging to green, arched overhead like a reminder. Nothing ends all at once. I brought no phone, no bag, just a paper napkin with a boiled egg and a square of dark chocolate folded inside. Simple things, enough for a bench breakfast. I found a spot by the pond where the ducks still gathered like gossiping old women, waiting for breadcrumbs and ignoring the chaos of the rest of the world. I sat, unwrapped the egg, ate slowly. A young woman jogged past, earbuds in, ponytail swinging like a metronome. An older man with a camera paused nearby, clicking at the water like he'd never seen ripples before. And me, I was just a woman in a soft coat, alone, with a warm egg and chocolate melting slightly on her fingers. Not someone's mother, or someone's burden, or someone's lesson to learn. Just myself. I watched a little girl kneel by the edge of the pond, her mother hovering behind her. She threw tiny pebbles into the water, one after another, eyes wide as the rings expanded outward. I remembered when my son was that age, how he used to narrate everything he did. Now I'm jumping, now I'm running, now I'm fast. Like life didn't count unless it was named out loud. Now he was a man of few words, carefully chosen ones, usually rehearsed. I no longer missed the boy. I just hoped the man was learning how to stand still inside his own silence. The breeze shifted. I closed my eyes and let the sun touch my face. There was no grand epiphany, no orchestral swell, just breath, just bone, just the quiet knowledge that I was, despite it all, still here. I thought about the letter in the drawer. I hadn't touched it since the day it arrived. I didn't reread it, didn't show it to anyone. I wasn't building a case. I wasn't tallying points. I was just letting it sit, unfolded inside a life that no longer bent toward begging. Maybe one day I'd write back, or maybe I wouldn't, and either would be fine. I'd let go of the fantasy that he'd show up at my door with flowers and tears, reciting every wrong word he'd ever said. Real apologies don't come in monologues. They arrive slowly, in changed tone, in quieter rooms, in smaller, repeated gestures. Let him learn that. Let him sit with the weight of love unearned. I peeled the last bit of shell from the egg and tossed it into the trash bin beside the bench. The chocolate, now soft, I ate in 2 bites. Then I just sat. An hour passed, maybe more. I watched the clouds shift like thoughts that didn't need answers. I listened to the gravel crunch with other people's steps. No one looked twice at me, and I liked it that way. For so long, I'd been studied, needed, assumed. Now I was just a woman in the park with nothing urgent to fix. The world didn't fall apart. The sky didn't ask for proof of my usefulness. I didn't feel triumphant, or noble, or tragic. I felt quiet, like a book closed gently after a long chapter. That evening, back in my apartment, I lit a candle and took out my sewing kit. There was a button missing on the sleeve of my coat. I'd been meaning to fix it for weeks. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Thread, needle, cotton under my thumb. Something small and mine coming back together. I saw him again 3 months later. Not planned, not expected. Just one of those strange, quiet loops life sometimes draws without asking. I was at the bookstore on 8th, my favorite one, with the old wooden floors and the bell that rings low when you walk in. I'd just picked up a new novel and was browsing the secondhand section when I heard my name, not Mom. Irene. It came from behind me. Cautious, not loud. A test balloon. I turned. He looked thinner. Not unhealthy, but softened. Less polished. His hair longer than usual, coat a little worn. He held a coffee in one hand and nothing in the other. I nodded. Hello? He stood there like a boy who didn't know if he was welcome. I didn't expect, he started, then let the words drop. He tried again. You look well. I am, I said simply. He smiled, but it didn't reach far. That's good. I'm glad. We stood in silence for a few moments. Around us, the shop hummed. The turning of pages, the shuffle of shoes, the low murmur of two students in the poetry aisle. How's the apartment? He asked. Peaceful, I said. Small. Enough. He nodded again, eyes drifting to the book in my hand. You still reading your mysteries? This one's about a botanist who solves murders with plant knowledge. He laughed a little. That sounds like you. I didn't answer that. Not everything needed a reply. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking about everything. Good. I know there's no undoing, he said, but I'm still trying. Quietly. I believe that, I said. Another silence. Not heavy, just careful. I didn't write again, he said. After the letter? I know. I thought maybe it wasn't my turn anymore. That made me pause. Because it wasn't a performance. Not this time. It was the first sentence he'd said that didn't reach out to grab or defend. Just rested, unclaimed. I looked at him fully then. You've grown, I said. Some? I'm not angry, I said. I know. I'm not waiting either. I know that too. And that was it. He didn't ask to come over, didn't ask for a meal or a second chance. He didn't try to reclaim a place that wasn't his anymore. We stood for another beat. I'm going to let you finish shopping, he said gently. All right. He turned, walked a few steps, then stopped. If you ever want to have coffee sometime, just talk. I'd like that. I'll think about it. He nodded once, not disappointed, just accepting. And then he left. No fanfare, no hugs, no strings. Just a man leaving a bookstore with nothing in his hands. I bought the book, took the long way home, past the bakery with the lemon bars I used to buy when I was tired of cooking, past the bench near the pharmacy where I once sat and cried into a paper bag of groceries, past the life I had poured myself into, and back into the life I now chose. In my apartment, I made tea and opened the first chapter. The wind tapped lightly against the window. I didn't feel triumphant or lonely, just whole. Whole in a way I hadn't known I could be. Not because someone came back, but because I didn't leave myself when they did. If you've read this far, maybe you understand. Maybe you've been someone's silence, or someone's bridge, or someone's easy-to-dismiss kindness. And maybe now, you're ready to come back to yourself too. Don't wait for dignity to be given. Claim it back. Quietly. Fully. Yours.